Welcome to the Feeling Loudly podcast, a show about the power and magic of emotion, explored through the lens of astrology, divination, and art. I'm your host, Jana. I'm an astrologer, a tarot reader, Akashic Records reader, poet, and witch, and I'm here to help you feel your feels. Hi, friends. Welcome to our third Friday Feel episode. I'm going to stop doing the reminders of what these podcasts or what this little series is all about because I think you might get it by now. Using the Reclaim Oracle and the Lilith Tarot to accompany it. We're going to dig into our feel for this week. I want to remind everyone, or I guess tell everyone for the first time perhaps, that tomorrow, Saturday, April 20th, is the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. I did record like a 20-minute podcast episode for my Patreon Four of Wands podcast, which you can sign up for Patreon in order to unlock. And one of the resounding messages from that episode was about taking some period of silence this week, ideally tomorrow, if you're listening to this on or before April 20th. That would be a really great idea. And just giving yourself a little bit of space from technology to open up to what comes through, spend time in nature. This is a Taurus transit, Jupiter and Uranus both in Taurus, and a beautiful time to be out there. So hope you can do that for yourself. Let's get into our feel for today. So today's card is Inhibition. And as usual, I'm going to start by reading the guidebook from the Reclaim Oracle. So Inhibition. Inhibition is a flower shying away from the sun. It's the dream not chased, the voice drowned in a crowd because it felt inadequate. It's sheltering within because the world has grown too mean. It's giving up because the light I seed burns when I look at it. So I walk the other way, hurt and defeated. This card today is clarified by the Eight of Wands, and this is a Mercury and Sagittarius card, and it's a funny contrast here. The Eight of Wands is a card that's often about swift progress and movement and momentum and truth. Mercury and Sagittarius is known for being kind of blunt and a sign or a placement that kind of like, delivers its truth with some degree of like straightforwardness and bluntness, whereas Inhibition is sort of the opposite of that, or at least not super congruent with the archetype of Mercury and Sag. And today the way that this is showing up for me is sort of as almost a solution or as an alternative. And it reminds me of the way that I've often dealt with inhibition or overcome inhibition as sort of just like saying the truth and like doing the thing and just kind of pushing myself off the ledge or like jumping off the ledge and doing something that's scary, like plugging my nose and diving into the deep end and allowing everything else to sort of catch up. And it's like the ripping the bandaid off approach, where something scares you, something feels intimidating, or you feel insecure about it. And so you just have to kind of like pretend and act as if and overcome the feeling of imposter syndrome, at least temporarily, by like pretending that it's not there. And I think that, it can be effective. It's like that, again, act as if, or dress for the role you want, like all of these little kind of slogan-y things or like idioms that tell us basically that there's a level of sort of performance and pretend that can really help us overcome inhibition, or at least like face up to challenges and put our inhibition aside temporarily so that we can step up and do something that scares us. And that's ultimately where inhibition comes from, is some degree of fear. Usually it's a part of us that feels quite small, that feels insecure, that's experiencing shame or any type of insecurity that tells a story for us. And often I think inhibition is sort of like this egoic expression where we may feel that we're gonna be judged or are being judged more harshly than is reality. And often that voice of judgment is coming from within and we're projecting it outward, but it's been planted there by someone along the way or by some experience along the way that told us that we were not good enough as we are, or that there was something to be ashamed of and something to be embarrassed about. It's something that I experience a lot in intimacy and in like interpersonal relationships. I shouldn't say a lot. It's improved a lot with age and maturity and growth and healing and all of that. But at times, if I open up or if I share something vulnerably, I'll then experience inhibition as a sort of like vulnerability hangover where I'll have this like boomerang feeling where it comes back around and it hits me, and then I overanalyze how I expressed myself or what I shared, or the resounding kind of question that comes up in my mind is like, oh, was that too much? Did I do too much? Was I over the top? Did I do too much? And I am a Leo moon, and so that is kind of a particular little sore point for me, and for a lot of Leo moons and folks with Leo placements can be the like too much narrative, like I came on too strong, I said too much, I did too much, I overexpressed myself, and then that can lead to this sort of like reactive shutdown where instead you might like go distant or get cold or try to kind of retrace your steps and undo what you perceive as some degree of damage or oversharing that causes humiliation. And so that's kind of how my inhibition works. Less and less, I'm going to take back what I was just about to say. I was going to say that less and less do I experience inhibition before doing something, and it's typically afterwards. And so I don't even know if you would like categorize that as the same thing. Maybe there should be two different words, inhibition and then like maybe it's humiliation. But they're very closely married for me. And again, like that, I guess, looking back at Mercury and Sagittarius can actually be that like sometimes when we do the thing and when we do rush forward and maybe take the like spontaneous move or make the spontaneous choice or do something that feels a little bit scary, then we experience that reactive inhibition. And then at other times we might experience a sort of premature inhibition that actually stops us from taking action, period. And so it's a to each their own thing, and I'm sure all of us experience both at various points in our lives. But like, where does that come from? Like, where does the story of humiliation come from for you? I'm asking you, sweet listener. Like, does your inhibition story, and when I say story, I mean like, what is the narrative or what is the belief that accompanies a feeling of inhibition? Because often it'll be a very similar and consistent refrain. Like I shared that mine is, I'm too much. What is the belief that you find cropping up in your sweet little mind when you're experiencing feelings of inhibition or humiliation? Like, what is the belief that underlies that feeling? Because if you can look at that belief, often that dispels the feeling, if you can kind of get to the heart of it and explore that a little bit more. Sometimes it completely uproots it because we recognize that the belief that underlies that emotion is false, or that it's just not very well founded, or that it's flawed inherently. And that can help us to relieve some of the tension and the pain that might come from that belief. At other times, maybe like going into it, we're like, no, I do believe this. I do believe I'm too much, or I do believe that I am not enough, or that I always fail, or that I am, never blank. Like these always never statements that often are beneath some of the most challenging emotions that we experience. And they become these little mantras that we tell ourselves unconsciously, often in all sorts of ways. And sometimes the ways that we repeat those beliefs to ourselves is through our actions. Like we'll think I'm not good enough, and then we will act in ways that seem to prove that to ourselves. Or we will seek people out who seem to prove that to us with their actions and the way that they treat us. And it can be this like self-fulfilling prophecy in a way where we collect all of this evidence that we've sort of like like created for ourselves that seems to mirror back to us what we already believe about ourselves. And so sometimes it can be kind of wild when if we're someone who experiences a lot of inhibition or fear or shame or self-doubt, it can be kind of wild to be around someone who believes in us. Like that has been a kind of shocker for me at moments that at first felt pretty uncomfortable, was when I had like teachers and friends and just people who I admired in my life who expressed faith and confidence in me. And that for a while actually kind of triggered my feelings of self-doubt and insecurity, because I believed that they were seeing some type of like false version of me and that it wasn't actually true. And then I had to, live up to this expectation. And it became this very like kind of self-sabotagey pattern where I couldn't even receive people's love and admiration because I didn't yet believe that about myself. And so it became this kind of like, what I perceived as like a standard that I then had to live up to. And eventually when I worked on my self-confidence and had explored a lot of those deeper beliefs and a lot of that deeper material and gone through like trauma healing and all this stuff and just like begun to care for myself in a way that showed me that I was capable of things that I didn't think I was capable of, with time, I gained that momentum. I found that sort of like Eight of Wands momentum that started propelling me forward, and I started doing shit that scared me all the time. The first thing that really comes to mind is my podcast, actually. Like, I used to be very inhibited and very self-conscious about the way that I would speak. And I was actually listening to a YouTube, like pick a card tarot reading that I did a year ago. Literally, I rewatched it today and it just happened to be posted on April 18th of 2023. And it was so wild to me because my voice sounded so different. And I really sounded like I was, I think, like trying to sound confident, like to me, and maybe this wouldn't be noticeable to other people, but I know how I was feeling, and I can kind of remember sitting behind the microphone and like the emotions that were coming up within me as I did this reading. And I really wanted to sound confident, and I really wanted to sound like I knew what I was talking about. And it was this very like very focused on how I would be perceived. And it's kind of wild to me that was just a year ago, because I feel like my voice has really evolved, like the literal tone of my voice and the way that I express myself, but also just, my voice and the way that I speak and the way that I share of myself and the confidence that I've experienced. But that didn't come from me like suddenly gaining the confidence and then coming back to the microphone. It came from me showing up like every day for a while and doing like tarot dailies on Instagram and podcasting even when I didn't want to, and doing pick a card readings and getting my Patreon revved up and doing like, twice a month readings on there that were more in depth, and a lot of discomfort. I, at the end of the day, am a 12th house Taurus Mercury retrograde, and it's not a cozy placement. It's a place in the chart that when it comes to self-expression and like, self-expression that's perceived by other people and heard by other people can be very uncomfortable. And I found my voice really through channeling and through talking to my guides and through talking to myself. I talk to myself all the time, and, talking to my ancestors at the altar and hearing myself speak in ways that felt at one point inauthentic to me, and then eventually morphed into self-expression that felt really true and authentic. And I still am challenged by this sometimes. Like, I'll still hear something that I record and be like, like, what's happening? What is that? And get judgmental and self-critical and all of that. But it's something that has evolved so tremendously for me from just doing it. And again, plugging my nose and just jumping in and doing it. and receiving positive feedback from people and receiving, comments and all sorts of affirmation that's been really, really lovely. But that was sort of, that was a bonus. It was really the practice of just getting up and doing it that helped me to overcome that as a sort of like little personal exposure therapy, I guess you could call it. Because I was really afraid of being on camera specifically. And so last spring, I think it was, when I started doing these like tarot daily videos on Instagram, these little minute-long videos, it was so uncomfortable for me. And I was so conscious of how my face looked and the expressions and the way that the tone of my voice sounded and how I was wording things and how I was moving and everything, like just picking myself apart. And over time, it got more and more easeful until eventually I was like, oh, this is fine. This might even be fun. And it just, I had to do it in front of other people to get over that. And so I'm not saying that this is an approach that will work for everyone by any means. I know we all have our own approaches to working with like challenging feelings and getting over humps and all of that. But I definitely think there is something to repetition and to like simple exposure at times to stuff that makes us uncomfy. And God, like, let me tell you, when I started doing shit that made me uncomfortable, it's like I started gaining momentum and I started craving exposing myself to new things that made me uncomfortable, but that I knew would be good for me ultimately. And today, like, I've been on a few podcasts. I've been a guest on a few friends' podcasts, and I'm going to be a guest on my former teacher's podcast soon. And, there are these experiences that if you had invited me to do this maybe a year ago, I probably would have declined or come up with an excuse or like just been really fearful and anxious. And today I do not feel that anxiety. Like the only thing I might feel anxious about is like preparing my notes in time or whatever, like basic procrastination challenges. But I do not feel the same level, anywhere close to the same level of anxiety about being perceived or being heard. And I think that I have managed to prove to myself that I can do shit that scares me. And it's not that I hadn't done that before, but I hadn't done it in such, I guess, an intentional way. This was very, very intentional. Like I set off to do those videos because I was like, I need to get on camera eventually. I know this, and that scares the fuck out of me. And so I need to do something about this, and this is the way that I know how. So I guess my little message to distill it is that sometimes taking the sort of like Sag, Mercury, Eight of Wands approach and just like setting our sights on something and giving ourselves the nudge and doing something that makes us slightly uncomfortable can then lead to a whole lot of momentum that helps us grow in incredible ways. Like this experience for me has trickled into different parts of my life. I now feel more comfortable having hard conversations with people. I feel more comfortable expressing my needs. I feel more comfortable expressing my desires. I feel more comfortable being honest about stuff, even when I'm afraid that someone might judge me for it or afraid that someone might reject me for it. It's helped me overcome people-pleasing tendencies because, like, getting on camera and saying the truth was huge. Like, it created this sort of like new neural pathway for me and helped, I guess, like grind the shit out of my little brain to create that new pathway that diverted me from those former habits of like saying what someone wanted to hear or changing and like adapting my voice in an inauthentic way to meet someone where they were at instead of being able to express myself genuinely. So, and I had to do that by myself. It had to be like behind a camera by myself where there wasn't someone else influencing me. And that process of repetition helped me create that new understanding of what my authentic voice sounds like. And then I had that baseline that made it easier for me to hear when I was being inauthentic with other people too. and then be like, oh, I guess what I'm saying right now is not super true, or is not like super authentic or genuine or sincere, because I can hear that my voice is doing that thing where it sounds insincere to me. And, so I guess the feeling that I get from this, from inhibition, is really that inhibition can be very deeply tied into people pleasing and this desire to present a certain way that is amenable to other people, that gives you a sense of acceptance, and that helps you to feel like you're not going to be rejected, or you're not going to stand out, or you're not going to do something that results in some degree of, again, rejection. And anyway, let me get into the song. Let's get to our song of the day. Our song of the day today is Radiohead, Everything in Its Right Place. And I love this song. I love this whole album deeply. And I read through the lyrics earlier just to kind of refresh myself. It's very simple and repetitive. It says, everything in its right place. Yesterday I woke up sucking on a lemon. Everything in its right place. There are two colors in my head. What is it that you tried to say? What was it that you tried to say? Tried to say everything. And so coming back to this, after I'm talking about self-expression and tried to say, what is it that you tried to say? What was it? What was that you tried to say? Tried to say everything. Yeah. So it's kind of opening up this other pathway for me that, like, sometimes our inhibition, specifically around speaking our truth, might be that we feel we have to reveal everything in order to be genuine or in order to be honest. And that's just not the case. Like, we can reveal ourselves in degrees that feel comfortable to us. And sometimes we might have a tendency, or at least I know I have often had the tendency of sharing like way too much about myself or way too little about myself, and like oversharing to the point that it felt uncomfortable to me and like unsafe, or undersharing to the point that it inhibited intimacy and didn't make space for me to connect emotionally with someone else because I was like self-censoring so much that we couldn't connect. And so there's something here about like finding your happy medium and finding what feels safe to you and what feels okay to you. And that often the inhibition we might feel in self-expression is that we might be going in to a degree that feels uncomfortable, or that is like overriding our own boundaries, or forcing ourselves to share stuff that we're not yet ready to share. And there's a certain degree of privacy that I think all humans need, and that we all ideally should have, that we should all ideally have a degree of privacy and get to make choices about how much of ourselves we share with people. And that's part of being self-loving and being self-respecting, is not sharing yourself with people that are not safe to share yourself with, or not sharing yourself with people when you're just not ready to. And only you can know the answer to that. And so there's, I think, another piece about inhibition here that also has to do with boundaries with ourselves, boundaries with our sharing, boundaries with the parts of ourselves that we share, because sometimes inhibition might be alerting us to the fact that there's actually a part of ourselves that is too touchy or too unhealed or too soft or vulnerable to be exposed to a connection that might not be ready to hold that part. And I think I want to end there. I don't have a whole lot more to say. That's it. Thanks for coming. I'm feeling a little inhibited. I don't know. I could go on, but I kind of want to keep it. I want to keep it short. So I hope that is interesting. And if you want, you can submit a question for our next AMA episode, which will be our first AMA episode, which will be published in early May, on the first Friday of May. Those episodes will be monthly, and there's a little question beneath every episode. If you're looking in Spotify that says submit a question for our next AMA episode, you can submit it there. You can also send in a voice message using the voice message link that is in the description. And as always, if you want to support my work and support this podcast, you can become a patron starting at $6 a month. You can also book a reading with me, and all of those links are down below. Oh, happy Taurus season. I can't believe I forgot to mention that. Yeah. It's been a beautiful day and I hope you guys are enjoying it and soaking up the sensuous vibes. Okay. I love you. Take care. Bye.